Hey everybody, welcome back to New York Comic Con. I promised you more comics and I am going to deliver in a big way. Please welcome Line Webtoon, all my comic artists, except for Sarah, who's not able to join us unfortunately. But gentlemen, please go down the line, introduce yourselves, and tell the people the comics that you create.
Hi, I'm Andy Stewart. I go by Noob the Loser online sometimes, but I make Elfin Warrior online Webtoon and Behind the Gifts online Webtoon, and a bunch of other stuff elsewhere.
Got some fans out there for sure.
Hi, I'm Shen. I make Blue Chair online Webtoon as well as Live With Yourself.
And I'm Dean Haspiel, and I do the Red Hook, and I'm doing a sequel to that comic called War Cry.
I'm Tom Akel. I'm head of content at Line Webtoon, and I'm co-writing a series called Back Channel with Stan Lee and Andy Tong.
Yes, Stan Lee. Yeah, Stan Lee's actually a good buddy of Pal. She got to interview him at C2E2. So right off the bat, what's it like working with the legend, man? The man.
You know, no pressure.
No pressure. How did that start for you guys?
I've been doing work with Stan probably on and off now for 10 to 15 years, starting way back when I was with a different company, writing and directing his ringtones. So I've just, been doing smaller projects with him over the years. We did a big superhero comics contest at Webtoon, gosh, almost 2 years ago now, that Stan kind of helped oversee, and following that, wanted to do something original.
Well, and Tom, how do you know these guys? Because you are part of Top Cow Comics. You are, in fact, one of the driving forces behind it, so you're making a lot of decisions up there.
Well, I think I've known Dean probably as long as I've known Stan now. So
Sorry,
that goes way back to MTV days, I think. And
wow.
then, these two guys, I don't know who these people are.
No, not at all.
Why are you here?
No? That's a lie. He gave me the deep dive on you guys. Do you want to admit anything to the people before we turn to Tom for your deep dark secrets?
I have no secrets.
Plead the fifth.
Plead the fifth. Well, guys, you are all exceptionally talented. How did each of you get started with Line Webtoon?
They reached out to me and a lot of other comic artists before they launched the app. And it was kind of, like, to be honest, a lot of people thought it was kind of sketchy. And so they asked me, they were like, are these guys legit? Like, do these guys actually pay you? And I was like, yeah. Because, it's so common in this type of industry that you just don't get paid and then they'll just, like, stiff you and run off. But no, these guys were good.
I remember that feeling. When Line Webtoon was first emerging as the platform in the US, at least in my consciousness, everybody was very much like, we're not used to people paying us to make things. So it seems very unusual to have a platform that's offering to do that. And there was that big contest that Steve McCraney ended up winning, and that was how I found out about it. And I think a lot of the cartoon world was driven that way by the fantastic dream of making $30,000 to make a comic series, which so many of us would do for free. So,
Yeah, I launched a webcomics collective in 2006 called Activate. And then I went on to create comics, something called Street Code for Zuda, when DC Comics had their webcomics initiative. And then I went and did Trip City. So I've been thinking about doing webcomics for over a decade, because I realized that was the future, and eventually everyone is on their phone, right? And we're all pretty lazy, and this is a great delivery system. And I met, but I didn't know how to monetize it. I couldn't figure that part out. And I had met Tom through MTV Geek, and he was promoting webcomics on that site, and we had a relationship between Activate and MTV Geek. And then a little while later, about 2 years ago, Tom came up to me and told me about this place called Line Webtoon, and asked me to submit something. And one of the things I submitted was this Red Hook comic, which was part of this new Brooklyn universe. And he helped me expand that into not just one comic, but three, actually, between Red Hook, another comic called The Purple Heart, and another one called The Brooklynite. And I've been there the last 2 years, and it's been great.
And a hell of a success story, if I may say. I think 2017 Ringo's winner for
I won, so...
Nice.
So, I mean, I'm used to getting Emmy Awards for doing,
Yeah,
working
so I guess this
television
is
and
a little
stuff.
tinier kind of thing, but...
But I had never I've been nominated for comic book awards.
You wanted the backpack.
But I've never won a comic book award, and so I got the Ringo, and I got it for the Red Hook for something I've created at an amazing platform. So yeah, it was really exciting to win a Ringo award.
Well, for all of you guys, by virtue of being online, you are more connected to your community than any other type of publishing. So what is it like constantly having interactions with your fan base, people who read your comic, watch it come out on the daily, and sometimes probably even want to influence it a little bit? Andy, you want to start us off?
Yeah, I like it. I definitely read probably, I mean, there's a level of narcissism in it. I read pretty much every comment on every update, but for me, that's fairly manageable. I just read them as they come, and it's fun to try to outsmart them because they dig into that stuff and try to guess what's going to happen, and you can tell if you're becoming too predictable because they'll be like, all right, this is going to happen, and in a way, it's nice to be able to kind of steer away from that and, you know, not necessarily rewrite things, but learn how to make things less predictable and see what you're doing right and what you're doing wrong and what they respond to and that kind of thing. So
yeah, that is a helpful feature, Ice.
It's a very like wholesome comment section, like very unusual online. This is like the one site where I would say like, yeah, read the comments. They'll like make your day better because like somebody will actually like come in and you know, like when somebody dislikes something, they're probably more tempted to comment. For some reason on Webtoon, it's like they're just like, hey dude, your comic rocks and you rock, and I'm like, wow,
you noticed.
You know, that's great. But they do, like, in terms of actually influencing the series, yeah, of course, like, I'll answer reader questions sometimes in comic form. It's a really cool platform to be on in that sense. Well, cool to have, like, that interactivity.
Yeah, Line Webtoon is like an affirmation app. But yeah, so when I created Activate in 2006, it was on. Anybody familiar with LiveJournal, the blogging platform?
Yeah.
You remember that? Probably none of y'all. Maybe I see a couple of nods. And that's what it was a lot about, was the interaction, was lifting the veil between the creator, and the reader. And it was a really good parlay. It energized the comic in a lot of ways. And I've been used to that ever since. Oddly enough, with the Red Hook, I wanted to avoid that. I wanted to have the discussion, but I wanted to see what other people were saying to each other and creating that kind of a language. But I will probably dive in at some point soon. But because what it is, it becomes like another job in a way. You know, like I'm already trying to get that comic out on a regular basis. And then there's this whole other, you know, dialogue that you're having, you know, which is really interesting. And you're right, it is about sometimes, because we write a lot of cliffhangers, narrative cliffhangers into our comics, you know, what's going to happen next. And the readership can influence sometimes the direction in which you're going, which is interesting.
Speaking of influence, I'm very curious, coming to a Comic-Con, do you get highly influenced by your peers being here and meeting them maybe for the very first time?
I'm very influenced by them, you know, kind of before I met them. I love to kind of devour the stylistic things that I see other people doing that I really enjoy and kind of put my own spin on it. But meeting them and connecting with them, especially through Webtoons, has been like this great sense of community among the creators, you know, hanging out with them and getting to know them and talking to them and learning that they're having a lot of the same experiences you're having, or they're having experiences that you will have, and being able to relate to somebody on that level. You know, we're all about the relatable content, and we can relate to each other in that way.
All good vibes.
Yeah.
Tom, you're in an interesting position too, because not only are you a content creator, but you're head of content for Line Webtoon. So it sounds like these guys are really, really happy with the community and the site you guys have created. What's it been like on your end, kind of experiencing it as a contributor and as a moderator?
Well, I have 600 separate accounts and logins, and I leave a lot of positive comments on Live With Yourself and
It's
Blue
him,
Chair.
guys. We figured it out.
So, you know, that takes up a lot of my day. No. I mean, you know, the community, the community that we have is awesome, and it's grown exponentially over the past couple of years. You know, we've only been in the U.S. since mid 2014. You know, and now we have millions and millions of readers, and we're filling rooms at cons, and it's you know, I don't want to say we didn't expect it. I think individually sometimes it's surprising. I kind of have the benefit of seeing the whole picture. You know, and the numbers and the things that these guys don't get to see every day as creators, where it's like, all right, we see the trajectory, and it's evident that there's a massive, massive untapped audience out there for comics like these.
And if I may, Tom has turned out to be a great curator of talent. A year ago, when I was promoting the launch of the Red Hook, some of my peers were like, what's going on? What's this comic about? Where is it at? You know, and I was explaining to them. This year, this show, most of my peers are coming up to me and wanting to get onto Line Webtoon.
Hey.
So that's pretty cool, you know?
You guys are the first ones in the club. Now the stanchions are up and the guys out front.
OG, we're OG, original.
OG crew.
That's right.
Well, one of the things that I always loved about going to comic book shops growing up is I would go in for one story, and I would leave with like maybe something else that caught my eye. Maybe it'd start a new series, you know, and I'd meet some people that loved comics. So I feel like as we've gone online, we've gone away from that. How does Line Webcomics kind of recreate that comic experience? Because it seems like I would go in for Red Hook and I would end up, you know, reading any of these guys.
Just look at that front page.
I mean, I think there's, you know, the discoverability is easier in the app than it would be in a physical store, but I think you know, in terms of the physical community, and you're right, that doesn't happen when you're engaged on a handset, but that kind of thing happens here. You know, when we have, you know, we did 2 panels this weekend, 2 things up on the stage, some off-site parties, and you know, and things of that nature, and we do that throughout the year at different cons, and you know, the creators get to connect with the fans, you know, I think constantly throughout the year.
What's been the craziest thing to happen to you guys since you joined up with Line Webtoons?
Honestly, just meeting all of the cartoonists that I, you know, really admired offline, just meeting up with them and befriending a lot of them and being part of that community. Sitting on a panel with an Emmy winner, that's great. That's pretty good.
You're welcome.
There. Stuff like, just basic stuff like that for me.
I wouldn't call it crazy, but
It's crazy.
Having full autonomy, you know, and owning the thing I create and being able to make a living at it and to put it out, it's amazing. I mean, I've never experienced that before. It's always been like I'm producing a webcomic while doing a job on this, you know, and one, you know, supports the other. But now I am living off of my creation, that's crazy.
Yeah, we had a Matt Hawkins up here just before, and he was saying that there's maybe 300, 400, you know, self-sustaining comic book writer artists out there. Do you feel like this is helping create more room, or is this just helping bubble you guys to the top where you might have had a harder time getting noticed before? Shen, you're making eye contact. You got an answer for me?
Well, I think it does create more room, actually. Like, I think it does expand that market because basically, like, not everybody who could be reading webcomics right now is reading webcomics, right? And yet it's such like an accessible format. It's something you can do when you're on the bus or like when you wake up or you're about to go to sleep. You know, I'm usually browsing like Imager or I'm on Line Webtoon, one of those two. So like if that market expands, if basically more people know that this is available to them and are familiar with the series, familiar with you know, what they can find there, then I think there's definitely more room. I think that 300 or 400 can expand to like a few thousand within the next few years.
Yeah, there's definitely, Tom's nodding. I guess you have the numbers. There's an audience to sustain that, right? How did each of you guys even get started doing comics? I mean, we had a discussion about how to break in, but what was the step before breaking in for each of you?
For me, I just started posting. I mean, I grew up with comics. I grew up reading The Far Side and Calvin and Hobbes, and my dad's an illustrator and my mom's a writer, and I just kind of took both of that, and I've been drawing comics since I was like 5. They were crap then, and they're still a little crap now, but I'm getting better. But I just started posting stuff on Tumblr, and my D&D comics that I did took off in a big way there. And that was so addictive, just like the validation of having, you know, hundreds of thousands of people looking at it. And then I eventually stumbled on a format called Behind the Gifts, where I started doing those comics a bunch, and those went nuts. And I kind of built my career off that. I got hired by College Humor as a staff illustrator, and then kind of transitioned into working with Webtoons after that. So I've been doing professional comics for about 4 years now.
I started, I think a few other webcomic artists have started this way, but I started in my school's newspaper. Like, I would send in comics to my college newspaper,
Hell yeah.
and yeah, they were super into them because they were like not only relatable, but they were relatable to the college. Like, I'd make puns about the names of the buildings and stuff. Then I guess I just kind of took a chance at some point and decided to start putting them online, anticipating for some reason like gallons and gallons of hate just immediately, because I hear that's what the internet is like, you know. So I'm just like, I post a comic to a 0 follower blog, immediately like 50 messages, just like stop, you know. Yeah. No, but it turned out better than expected a little bit. So. Yeah.
I'm happy, man. I'm happy it works out that way.
Yeah. What about you, Dean?
I mean, I grew up, I mean, before the app, before a comic shop, there was something called a newsstand. And I would peruse the newsstand for comic books. And so my dream was to one day grow up to pencil the Fantastic Four. But I wasn't good enough as I was, you know, growing up and doing my weird little style. And I realized after a while I was otherwise unemployable, so I had to make comics. And so I just kept focused, and I was crazy about stories and visualizing stories. And little by small, I would make mini comics, or I'd make comic books with my high school friends. I mean, I felt at one point, you know, we have this culture now where there's you push a heart or a like or a share or whatever. And for me, if I finished something and I showed it to my friend, it was published. You know, that's what it felt like until I decided to try to become a professional. But I don't remember not making comics, you know? So I've been doing this forever, but I haven't been trapped by my old ideas. I always do think about the delivery system and how to get these ideas, these stories into your hands, and now we have that.
Tom, I gotta know how you got into this, because you're a power user, if there ever was one in the comic scene.
I kind of fell into it a little more, maybe accidentally, than these guys. You know, I grew up, I read everything, had a love of comics, always wanted to work in comics, but you know, and was at Marvel for a half a minute working on the website and the online comics player, God, 10 or 15 years ago, and then wound up going through different sort of entertainment companies over the years, where it was a lot of animation and gaming and some television stuff and online video, and you know, one thing kind of spilled into the next. And at one point during my time at MTV, we started a site then called MTV Geek and founded an MTV Comics line, which was all digital. And then that just kind of led to Webtoon, and funnily enough, through Stanley's office is how I got connected to Webtoon. And then, you know, seeing a comics company doing what we were already doing overseas and the desire to build that here, and it was so evident that like there's a need for this and it can be successful globally, that like it was super exciting.
I think that the dirty secret for of people who organize and are the leaders and the publishers and editors of comics, everyone wants to make comics that work in comics. It's very rare that I meet a reader only, you know? So
That's definitely, video games is a lot like that as well. My last question for you guys, because we're running out of time here, is I just want to give you a chance to tell everyone where to find your comics, where to find you, and where to get, you know, involved in the Line Webtoon community.
Yeah, Line Webtoon is where I have the 2 series that I've got going on right now. Elfin Warrior is a fantasy comedy kind of comic. If you're into Dungeons and Dragons or fantasy or comedy, it's a good one. And then Behind the Gifts is kind of my gag goof comic. They're both on there under comedy. Other than that, you can keep up with me, Noob the Loser, on Facebook or on Twitter. And I post pretty frequently.
You can also find me online, Webtoon.
Weird. It's so weird how that works out.
Legit.
I've never seen you on there.
No. It's I'm hard to find, but it's my comics on there are Blue Chair, which updates Tuesdays, Thursdays, and Saturdays, and Live With Yourself, which updates on Sundays generally, or the previous night after midnight, rather. Aside from that, I guess you can find me on Twitter and Reddit and Imgur, all under the handle, and then video games, all under the handle like Shenanigans, and like whenever. Please don't take that handle. Also, if I'm not there somewhere, but usually that's me. If somebody has that username.
Again, my name is Dean Haspiel, and I think I'm the only person that has that name on planet Earth. So just write it on a rock, throw it at the internet, and you'll find me. So the first comic I did, The Red Hook, is about a super thief that is forced to become a superhero against his will or he will die during a time when Brooklyn reveals itself to be sentient and its heart has been broken by the apathy and indifference of the world and decides to physically and literally secede from New York City, ergo America, to start its own republic, which is pretty bananas. It's something I've been thinking about for a while to talk about art. And because it's the fourth day at the con, I'm a little hungover, I've actually wrote down what my next comic is about. That, forgive me as I read. The next comic I'm doing, which I believe launches like in November.
November.
1 month. Called War Cry, and it's a sequel to The Red Hook, and a little bit of a spoiler. War Cry is about the Red Hook's dead girlfriend who has been resurrected into a human of mass destruction by way of a teenage boy named Ray Jack, who discovers he's gay. And this complicates things between the Red Hook and his old flame. Meanwhile, the Red Hook tries to remind her who she was so they can live to love again. But alas, another character from the Red Hook's past has also been resurrected and wants something that could kill them all. This story is about resurrection, revenge, and redemption. It's wild and ambitious. And it's influenced by, I don't know how old some of the audience members are, but if you're a fan of Jack Kirby's OMAC, One Man Army Corps, think OWAC, One Woman Army Corps, mixed up with Captain Marvel, Shazam,
Dean,
by
that
CC
sounds
Beck.
amazing.
No, it's bananas.
All right, you guys are going to have to Google Dean
Thanks a lot.
Haspiel. You guys got to check out Shen. You got to check out Andy. And Tom, I know
I
you're
do
working
one
on something
plug?
with Stan Lee. Plug it.
I'm gonna plug, because you asked how people can get onto Webtoons. As creators, one of the biggest parts of the platform is that there's a UGC element, so it's kind of like the YouTube of comics, and that's called Discover. Anybody who wants can upload their content there, and a lot of our top hits come out of there and move to featured, where these guys are published. We just announced this weekend that we are committing an additional $1 million to fund those creators.
That's
so
incredible.
Anybody who goes in can go into Webtoon, upload their comic, sync it to their Patreon account, and all the information's on the site, but there'll be $1 million basically there for the taking across all of them.
Guys, Line Webtoon, check it out. Amazing creators, amazing comics. We're going to be right back to New York Comic Con with a lot more coming from this stage right